3 years back, me and my younger sister Emily were renting a duplex in New Orleans, in the Bywater neighborhood near the river, while we were both at Tulane. I was 22, she was 20. I was in my second year of grad school for architecture, and she was finishing her third year in psychology. Our parents had moved abroad for my dad's contract with an oil company. He was working in the United Arab Emirates for 3 years, and my mom went with him. They didn't ditch us or anything. They just figured we'd be fine, and we wanted to stay. So Emily and I stuck together, split costs, and tried to act responsible. The place itself was an old Creole house split into 2 halves. High ceilings, floors that creaked, and an AC that worked intermittently, which is a cruel joke in Louisiana summer. Still, the rent was affordable for students, and Bywater felt safer than the other neighborhoods we looked at. One night in August, around 11, we were on the sagging couch watching a series on my laptop. We were half zoning out, half laughing at dumb plot twists. Then the AC stopped humming. Just silent in the middle of a cycle. A second later, the refrigerator stopped its low noise, then the router lights went out, and we were sitting in darkness except for the laptop screen. I assumed a power outage. But it was weird because there was no storm. No thunder, no wind, no rain, nothing. Just heat and still air. I shut the laptop and went to the front window to look outside. The streetlights were on. I could see light in the houses on both sides, TVs flickering, someone moving in a kitchen across the street. Even the other half of our duplex still had power because music was coming through the wall like normal. Emily said, "That's not right. If they cut power, it's usually the whole block." That's when I got this cold, anxious feeling, like my brain was trying to catch up to what my body already understood. I didn't want to stand there talking about it. I went through the place and locked the front door deadbolt and chain, then locked the back door with the key. I lowered all the blinds we normally left open for airflow. The only light was our phones and the laptop, and I didn't want anyone seeing that from outside. Emily kept asking what she should do, not in a needy way, more like she was trying to stay calm. I told her to go to the bathroom because it was the smallest room in the center, with no windows. "Lock it and stay quiet until I call you," I said. She nodded, took her phone, and walked down the hall. A second later, I heard the bathroom lock click. With my phone flashlight on, I told myself I was just checking the breaker box. Breakers trip. Old wiring fails. That explanation didn't fit the timing, but I needed something practical to do. The electrical box for our unit was outside, in the narrow passage between our duplex and the neighbor's house. I stepped out through the side door and kept the flashlight low. The box was in a little metal cabinet, with a padlock on it, or it was supposed to. The door was open, hanging on one hinge, and the lock was broken. The hasp was bent and torn like somebody forced it with brute strength. I touched the lock and it was still warm, which made my stomach drop. Inside, the main breaker was flipped to off, lever down. Every smaller breaker was down too, turned off one after another, like someone took their time. It wasn't a random trip. Someone had shut our power off deliberately, and they managed to do it without killing power for the other half of the house. I was staring at it when I heard footsteps on gravel from behind the corner of the house, coming from the backyard side. Heavy and unhurried, like someone walking around checking the perimeter. I didn't wait to see who it was. I rushed back inside, slammed the side door, locked it, and shoved a kitchen chair under the handle for extra bracing. I didn't turn the electricity back on. From the street, our half stayed dark, like nobody was home. I grabbed my phone and dialed 911, but before the dispatcher picked up, I decided to put on a show for whoever was outside. Loudly, so it would carry through the door and the thin walls, I said into the phone, "Yes, officer. Someone is trying to break into our house. We locked ourselves inside. There's two of us. My address is 3247 Burgundy Street Duplex, left half. Please come as soon as possible. Someone cut our electricity and they're walking around the house." I repeated the address twice. Only after I did that did I hear the dispatcher actually on the line, asking the usual stuff: my name, if anyone was hurt, if the suspect was inside. I answered fast and kept listening with one ear for noise outside. I added, a little louder again, "We hear footsteps in the backyard right now." Right after that, I heard a sharp scramble, gravel spraying like someone took off running. It wasn't slow, careful steps anymore. I rushed to the back kitchen window and lifted the blind just a crack. I saw a dark figure, maybe a hoodie, hopping the wooden fence and dropping into the alley behind the houses. I didn't open the window and I didn't chase them, which Emily later thanked me for, like that was some brave choice and not just panic. I whispered down the hall, "Emily, stay in the bathroom." She said, "I'm here," and I heard her shift on the tile. The police arrived about 12 minutes after my call. It felt longer, but in New Orleans that was honestly decent. 2 officers came, a man and a woman, and they were calm in that professional way that made me feel stupid for shaking. I opened the front door with the chain still on until they identified themselves, then let them in and had Emily come out. They searched the yard and the alley with big flashlights, checked the side passage, and photographed the broken padlock on the electrical box. At the back window of Emily's bedroom, the female officer, Rodriguez, pointed at the flower bed. In the soft dirt were clear boot prints, ridged soles like work boots, around a 10.5 or 11. The prints were deep and close together, like whoever stood there had waited and shifted their weight while looking in. Rodriguez told us it was a common home burglary tactic in the city. They cut power to a single unit so the resident steps outside to check the breaker, and that's when they either slip in through a door they hope is unlocked, or they jump the person outside. She said we did the right thing staying inside and calling, because most people get curious and walk straight into it. They wrote up a report, took photos as evidence, and told us to replace the lock and add cameras. They also suggested we tell the neighbors, because whoever did it might try another house. Emily and I installed 2 cameras the next day, one on the front door and one on the backyard. A month later, when the semester ended, we moved into a student complex closer to campus with a gate, code locks, and someone on duty at night. Now, anytime the power goes out anywhere, I check if it's just me. If it is, I don't go outside to check it. I call the police first thing because seconds can mean the difference between safety and danger. My hand was reaching for the panic button under the counter when I saw the gun. I was 22, working nights at a 24-hour convenience store in an industrial zone when my coworker called in sick. The owner, Sam, convinced me to work alone for double pay, $160 instead of $80 for an 8-hour shift. I needed it badly. My tuition debt was piling up and my account was always in the red. Sam kept saying it was fine. "Nothing's happened here in 2 years," he told me. "Cameras are on, and the alarm goes straight to police. If you feel weird, hit it." Around 2 a.m., the door chimed and 2 men walked in wearing hoodies even though it was mild outside. One went straight to the drinks cooler in the back. The other stopped by the magazine rack near the entrance and just stood there, hands in his pocket, not really reading. I did the automatic cashier thing and said hi. He didn't answer. He looked past me, then up, like he was checking where the cameras were. That's when my heart started going fast, because their behavior felt off. People either grab what they want or ask a question. These 2 were studying the place. I tried to tell myself I was being paranoid, but I couldn't stop watching the guy by the magazines. He kept shifting his weight like he was waiting for a cue. The first guy finally came up with an energy drink. He walked slow and didn't look me in the eye. He kept staring past my shoulder, like he expected someone to step out. I rang it up. $2.99, I said. He just stood there. No wallet. Nothing. It was this long, quiet pause where I could hear the cooler hum and my own breathing. Then I heard footsteps behind me on my left. I turned and saw the second guy moving toward the end of the counter where the plastic barrier stops and there's that open gap for employees. He wasn't browsing anymore. He was coming in like he already knew exactly where to go. My instinct screamed to hit the panic button right now, and my hand slid under the counter, fingers feeling for it. And I hesitated. I hate admitting that, but I did. I had this stupid thought of Sam getting mad, or me getting written up for wasting police time, and my brain tried to make it normal. Maybe he just wanted gum. Maybe he was going to ask for cigarettes. Maybe I was being dramatic because I was alone. My fingers were almost on the button when the guy with the drink pulled a black pistol from his hoodie pocket and pointed it at my face. The barrel was close enough that I didn't have to squint to see the hole. The second guy leaned over the counter edge, grabbed my wrist hard, and yanked it away from under the counter. I went completely still. "Open the register," the gun guy said. He sounded young and nervous, like he was trying to copy a tough voice. "Don't do anything stupid." I opened the cash drawer with shaking hands. There was maybe $80 in small bills and change. Store procedure was to move any larger bills to the safe in the back whenever the drawer went over $100, and I'd done the last transfer around 1 a.m. The gun guy looked down, cursed, and his eyes got mean. He demanded I open the safe. I told him, in this shaky voice I barely recognized, that I didn't know the code, and only the day manager did. The second guy let go of my wrist and started ripping cartons of cigarettes off the shelves behind the counter, stuffing them into his hoodie. The first guy kept the gun on me, then yanked the landline phone cord out of the wall and threw the receiver into a corner. He snatched my cell phone from next to the register and pocketed it. The first robber ordered me to lie face down on the floor behind the counter and not move for 5 minutes after they leave, or they'll come back. I stayed flat on the cold linoleum with my arms over my head, like he told me, and listened. Behind the counter I heard them moving fast, grabbing energy drinks, vapes, and whatever else they could carry. Something plastic clattered. I almost sat up, then stopped. I kept counting to 5 minutes, over and over, until my throat felt dry. The door chimed, then chimed again as it swung shut. A car engine started outside, revved once, and faded down the street. After that, the store was quiet except for the cooler hum. I still did not move. Time got weird. I could not tell if it was seconds or 10 minutes, and my heart would not slow at all. When I lifted my head, my arms were tingling from being pinned under me. The shelves behind the counter looked stripped. I slid my hand under the counter for the panic button and missed it a few times because I was shaking. The third try, I pressed it. It was supposed to call police, but I needed proof it worked. I remembered Sam kept a spare phone in the back room. I went back, locked the door, and found it in the usual drawer. My fingers slipped on the keys. The operator answered and I said, fast, that I had been robbed at gunpoint and my phone was taken. She said a patrol was already dispatched and to stay inside. I went back out front but stayed behind the counter where I could see the entrance. I slid down the wall and hugged my knees. Every sound outside made me jump, even a truck passing. I kept watching the gap at the end of the counter, sure someone would step through again. I tried to breathe and keep hands still. Police arrived about 12 minutes later. 2 officers came in and asked if I was hurt. They kept watching the entrance while I talked. The next 3 hours blurred together. Yellow tape, them checking the back room, and me repeating my statement until my throat hurt. Then we reviewed the security footage on the monitor, rewinding it again and again. The cameras showed their hoodies and size, but the hoods hid their faces. What the system did catch was the license plate on an old Honda Civic as it left. Around 5 a.m., Sam arrived and looked pale. He kept apologizing for convincing me to work alone that night. I nodded, stared at the floor, because my voice kept breaking. Week and a half later, the detective called. They tried another 24-hour store in a neighboring district, but that alarm was faster and officers caught them. He gave me names: Kyle Whitaker, 24, and his 30-year-old cousin with a heroin conviction. The cash and goods from my store were gone in 3 days, traded for drugs, so they tried again. He asked me to look at photos to confirm. When he slid Kyle's picture across the table, I felt sick because I recognized him. A couple months earlier, he came in late and bought cigarettes, and I barely noticed. He was just another night customer. In the photo, he looked wasted and gaunt, like drugs had aged him 10 years. I barely slept for a week after the robbery. The gun was in my dreams and I woke up tense. Sam hired a second person and installed reinforced locks. Even with a partner, I lasted a month, then found a different job, because walking into that store brought back the image of the gun being pulled from the hoodie pocket. This happened last fall, early October of last year. I work as a junior accountant at a small consulting firm, and that Thursday, I had an extremely long workday. We were closing the quarterly report for a major client, and the deadline was Friday morning. I sat in the office until 9 p.m. checking spreadsheets, reconciling numbers, and fixing mistakes from a coworker who'd gone on vacation and left me his part of the work. By the end of the day, my head was splitting from tension and constant staring at the monitor in poor lighting. When I finally closed the last Excel file and shut down my computer, my head was pounding so hard I could barely look at the bright corridor lights. I got in my old 2006 Toyota Camry in the office building's underground parking and drove home. But on the way, I remembered I was out of ibuprofen, and the headache was only getting worse. I saw the familiar green and white sign of a 24-hour CVS on the next street and turned in. I wanted to quickly run in, buy painkillers, and go home to sleep. The parking lot was nearly empty, just 3 cars including mine, and I parked right at the entrance under a bright lamp. My Camry had a chronic problem with the central locking system. It often jammed, especially on the driver's side, and took several attempts to lock all the doors. For quick stops at stores, I usually didn't bother with the lock, just got out and went. There was never anything valuable in the car anyway, just old CDs and a sports jacket on the back seat. I walked into the brightly lit pharmacy and went to the pain reliever aisle, picked a large pack of Advil and a bottle of water so I could take it right away. In the pharmacy besides me, there was only one other customer, an elderly woman around 70 at the vitamin counter, and 2 employees, a young cashier about 20 with pink hair and a middle-aged pharmacist in a white coat behind the high prescription counter. I took my items and walked to the register, put them on the conveyor belt. The cashier started scanning the Advil pack when the pharmacist called out to me from his counter about 5 meters away. He asked if I was the one who came in the gray Camry parked right at the entrance. I nodded, slightly surprised by the question. Why did he need to know? Then the pharmacist came out from behind his counter, walked closer, and said something that made my heart skip. "Did you come alone?" Because about a minute or minute and a half ago, I saw through the window some guy open the back door of your car and climb inside, closing the door behind him. I stood stunned, not knowing what to say. Thoughts raced through my head. Maybe it's a mistake. Maybe he confused cars. Maybe it's someone's stupid joke. The pharmacist pointed at the big storefront window. From there, you had perfect visibility of the parking lot and my car under the lamp. He explained he was standing at the tall prescription shelf arranging medication boxes alphabetically when he noticed movement outside. A man in a dark hoodie, looked about 30, came from the direction of the road, quickly walked to my Camry, looked around, then opened the rear driver's side door and climbed inside fast, shutting the door. The whole thing took maybe 10 seconds max. The pharmacist said at first he thought maybe it was my friend or boyfriend waiting for me in the car, but then realized the behavior was too suspicious and furtive. A normal person doesn't hide in someone else's car. I remember staring at the bottle on the counter like it was something to hold on to. I didn't want to look at the window because it made it real. The pharmacist asked, "Do you want me to call someone?" And I couldn't answer. My mouth was dry, and I kept thinking about that lock I never fixed. I felt cold run down my back and arms despite the warm pharmacy air. I blurted, "I'm alone. Nobody's waiting for me." I went to the front window and stared at my Camry under the lamp. It was about 9:30. The lot was bright enough to see the doors, but my rear windows are tinted, so I couldn't tell if anyone was inside. The car sat there, still. If a person was laid out on the back seat or down on the floor, I'd never know from here. The pharmacist said, "Okay. We call the police." I agreed, still half convinced it had to be a mistake. The cashier grabbed her phone, dialed 911, and said, "Someone got into a customer's car." Then she handed it to me. My hand was shaking and I had to grip the phone with both hands. I gave the dispatcher the address and told her what the pharmacist saw. A man in a dark hoodie opened the rear door and climbed in. She told me not to go outside, not to confront anyone, and to stay inside until officers arrived. I hung up, paid for the Advil and water, and stood by the glass watching my car. The cashier came over and stood next to me. The older woman from the vitamin aisle drifted closer and said, "Thank God they caught it." The pharmacist went back behind the counter but kept looking up toward the lot. After what felt way longer than it was, 2 patrol cars rolled in with their lights on but no sirens. 4 officers got out. They moved fast, like they'd done it before. 2 approached my Camry from different sides, flashlights out, scanning the windows and the ground around it. 1 officer stopped at the rear passenger door and leaned in, shining his light through the glass. His shoulders tightened, and he said something sharp to his partner. He opened the door hard and blasted the light inside. I saw quick movement, then hands reaching in. They pulled a guy out from low in the back, like he'd been folded down between the seats. My old gray sports jacket was over him like he'd tried to disappear under it. Dark hoodie, jeans, white sneakers, thin face, scruffy beard. He avoided looking up, and for a second I honestly felt stupid for ever leaving my car unlocked. They cuffed him and sat him on the curb. An officer came to the pharmacy door and asked me to step out for a statement. My legs felt weak, but I went. The sergeant, Thompson, asked the basics. Yes, it was my car. Yes, I was alone. No, I didn't know the man. He told me the guy wasn't answering questions, and they were taking him in for unlawful entry, and they'd look into what he was trying to do. He asked me to come to the station in the morning for a written report, and said they'd checked my car and nothing was taken or damaged. I went back inside and thanked the pharmacist. I was shaking and trying to play it off like, "Seriously, thank you." But my voice cracked anyway. He just said, "I keep an eye on the lot. Too many things happen at night." I drove home with every door locked and my mirrors checked way too often, and I barely slept because I kept running the same thought on repeat. If he hadn't noticed, I would have walked out, gotten in, and started driving. And who knows what that person planned to do hiding in the back seat. Rob me at a light, force me to drive somewhere, or something even worse. 8 years ago, when I was 21, I was studying at a small university in Oregon, where the crime rate was basically zero, and most students walked around campus freely even at night. Back then, I rented a cheap apartment 3 blocks from the main library and walked home often. I usually stayed late for studying because my roommates were loud, and the library was the only place I could focus. That Thursday, I stayed in the reading room until about 10:30 p.m. for a sociology exam. When I finally left, the corridors were empty and the desk lights off. I walked out with my bag and my keys already in my hand, not thinking twice about it. The student street outside was well lit, and there were still a few cars passing. I felt fine because I'd done that same walk dozens of times, and nothing bad ever happened. At the next intersection, I noticed a man in his mid-30s standing by a mailbox, looking down at an envelope like he was double-checking an address. He looked normal, like any local. Jeans and a jacket. Not drunk, not yelling, just waiting there, so I barely registered him at first. As I got closer, he looked up and asked, polite and casual, if I could tell him how to get to Weston Hall Dormitory. I didn't stop fully, just pointed and said, 2 blocks straight, then left. He thanked me, and I kept going because bed sounded better than talk. Maybe 5 seconds later, I heard footsteps behind me. I told myself it was normal, that he was just heading the same way, but the pace matched mine too perfectly. I glanced back. He was behind me, about 5 meters away, and the envelope was gone from his hands now. I sped up without making it obvious, like I was just in a hurry. The footsteps sped up too. That's when my stomach sank. The street climbed uphill toward the residential area, and the lights thinned out fast. It went from campus bright to dim and quiet with nobody else around. I slowed for half a step to test it, and he slowed too, like he didn't want to pass me. That's what made it feel wrong. He'd asked for Weston Hall, and that was the other direction. If he was harmless, why not say anything? All I heard was shoes. We were deep enough into the neighborhood that every house looked asleep, windows dark, no one on porches. If he closed that 5-meter gap, I didn't see how anyone would notice, let alone help. My heart was racing, and my brain started throwing worst-case ideas like it was a game. The truth was, I didn't have pepper spray. I didn't know self-defense. I didn't even have a loud keychain alarm or anything like that. I had notes, a charger, and a stupid university ID card. I remember thinking this is what happens when you get comfortable and stop paying attention. Then I stopped hard, like I just remembered something. I turned around and made my voice loud and steady. I said, I know self-defense. I have pepper spray, and I'm not afraid to use it. None of that was true, but in that moment lying felt safer than running alone. He froze 3 meters away, like my words had hit a wall. For a few seconds he didn't talk. He just looked at me, face, and I tried to keep my shoulders back so I didn't look small. Then he smiled, not wide, but enough to show he wasn't scared. He said, calm and almost friendly, relax, I'm just walking in the same direction. Don't be so paranoid. The way he said it made my skin crawl because it sounded rehearsed, like he'd used that line before. I stood there, still facing him, waiting to see what he'd do next. I've replayed those seconds for 8 years because I can't tell if he was lying or testing me, and that uncertainty sticks. In that moment, I learned how thin safe really is for me. Then he turned left onto a side street and disappeared around the corner of a building. I stood there for another minute, listening, trying to tell if he was still nearby or if he'd actually gone. I didn't hear anything, which made me feel both relieved and stupid. Then I ran the rest of the way to my apartment. Not a jog. A real run with my bag bouncing and my keys clenched hard in my fist. I didn't look behind me until I hit my block, and even then I kept moving. Inside the building, I took the stairs 2 at a time and fumbled my key like I'd never used it before. Once I got in, I locked everything. Deadbolt, chain, the little knob lock. I checked the windows even though I was on the 2nd floor. I pulled the blinds down. I put a chair against my bedroom door. I know that doesn't really stop anyone, but I needed to do something. I spent the night practically sleepless, jumping at every sound in the stairwell, and I kept my phone in my hand in case I had to call. In the morning, I convinced myself I'd overreacted. It was Oregon, small campus. Nothing ever happened. Maybe he really was just walking in the same direction and my bluff freaked him out. I thought about reporting it to campus police, but I had no name, no plate, no actual crime. Just a guy behind me. I pictured the officer writing it down while I sounded dramatic, and I couldn't deal with that. So I didn't call. I went to class and tried to forget it. A month later, early December, an emergency alert went out through campus news. I remember seeing it and thinking it was another stolen bike thing. It wasn't. An art student had been attacked on a street 2 blocks from the library late at night. The message described the attacker approaching her and asking for directions. When she turned away to point the way, he grabbed her and started hitting her. She screamed, and passers-by heard it, called police, and managed to pull him off before it got worse. The street name was the same one I'd walked, and my hands started shaking. When they showed the arrested suspect on local news, I recognized him immediately. Same face, same jacket, same calm smile like I'd imagined it 100 times. I called the number on the alert and told them I'd had an encounter with him weeks earlier. A detective called me back and had me go through it in order. Where he stood, what he asked, how close he got, when he turned off. He said the suspect had been stalking female students for several weeks, watching who left the library alone, studying their routes, and choosing spots where there wouldn't be help. Hearing that made my "maybe I'm paranoid" excuse feel pointless. I asked him if my report back then would have changed anything right there. He didn't promise it would, but he said an earlier call like mine would have put extra patrols on that corridor and maybe pushed them to look at footage sooner. Then he told me, in a pretty blunt way, not to blame myself, because people hesitate when they're not sure, and that's what guys like this count on. I said I understood, but I didn't. Not really. I still think about that night when I'm walking alone, and I still hear myself deciding not to make a fuss. That girl got hurt because I stayed quiet, because I was afraid of looking stupid, and I can't stop thinking she'd be okay now. This happened last fall, early October of last year. I work as a junior accountant at a small consulting firm, and that Thursday, I had an extremely long workday. We were closing the quarterly report for a major client, and the deadline was Friday morning. I stayed at my desk until about 9 at night, checking spreadsheets, reconciling numbers, and fixing mistakes from a coworker who had gone on vacation and dumped his section on me. By the time I finally closed the last Excel file and shut down my computer, my head was pounding so hard I was squinting at the bright hallway lights. I rode the elevator down to the underground garage, got into my old 2006 Toyota Camry, and drove out feeling like I was doing it on autopilot. 2 streets later, I remembered I was out of ibuprofen at home. I usually keep a bottle in the bathroom cabinet, but apparently I had finished it and never replaced it. The headache was getting worse, and I knew if I went home without anything, I'd just lie there miserable. I saw the green and white sign of a 24-hour CVS on the next street and turned in, thinking I'd be in and out in 2 minutes. The parking lot was almost empty, just 3 cars including mine. I parked right by the entrance under a bright lamp, mostly because it felt like the obvious safe choice. I didn't notice anyone walking around outside, no guy loitering, nothing. Just quiet. It was the kind of empty lot that makes you think everyone else is home already asleep. My Camry has this chronic issue with the central locking. It jams, especially on the driver's side, and it takes a couple tries to lock all the doors. Sometimes it doesn't lock on the first try, and I have to stand there hitting the button until I hear the click. For quick stops, I usually didn't bother, because there was never anything valuable in the car. Old CDs, a sports jacket on the back seat, random receipts. I was also tired and in pain, so I just got out and went inside. The store was bright in that way that makes a headache feel sharper. I went straight to the pain reliever aisle, grabbed a large pack of Advil, and grabbed a bottle of water so I could take it right away. There was only one other customer, an older woman at the vitamins, and 2 employees. The cashier looked about 20 with pink hair, and the pharmacist was a middle-aged guy in a white coat behind the prescription counter. I walked to the register and set my stuff down. The cashier started scanning the Advil, and I was already fishing my card out when the pharmacist called out from his counter, maybe 15 feet away. He asked, "Did you come in the gray Camry parked right at the entrance?" I nodded, confused, and said, "Yeah, that's mine." He didn't smile or anything. He just asked, "Did you come alone?" My throat went dry, and I had this quick, stupid thought. Why would he even notice my car unless something about it looked wrong? Before I could even ask why, he came out from behind the counter and walked closer. He kept his voice low and said, "Did you come alone? Because about a minute, maybe a minute and a half ago, I saw a guy open the back door of your car and climb inside. He shut the door behind him." I just froze. For a second, my brain tried to argue with him, like maybe he had the wrong car. Maybe it was a friend of mine I forgot about. Maybe I misheard. The pharmacist pointed at the big front window. From there, you had a perfect view of the lot, and my Camry was still under that lamp exactly where I'd left it. He told me he had been standing at a tall shelf alphabetizing medication boxes when he noticed movement outside. A man in a dark hoodie, maybe around 30, came from the road, walked fast to my car, looked around, opened the rear driver's side door, and slid in quick. The whole thing took maybe 10 seconds. He said at first he thought it might be my boyfriend or a friend waiting, but the guy's behavior was too suspicious, too furtive, like he was trying not to be seen. I still think about how normal I felt 2 minutes earlier, like a headache was my biggest problem. One random stop, one car I didn't lock, and suddenly I was trying to picture a stranger sitting 3 feet behind my driver's seat. I could feel this cold run down my back and arms even though the store air was warm. I told the pharmacist, "I'm alone, I don't know anyone here," and I went straight to the window, staring at my Camry under the lamp. It was around 9:30. The lot was lit, but my rear windows are tinted, so I couldn't see anything moving inside from I stood. The car looked normal, and that made it worse, because I knew someone could be crouched on the floor, and I would miss it anyway. He suggested calling the police, and I nodded, even though part of me kept insisting he must have mixed up cars in the dark outside. The cashier pulled her phone from her apron, dialed 911, and explained there might be a man hiding in my vehicle right now. She handed it to me, and I gave the dispatcher the address, my car description, and said I had not approached it since parking earlier. The dispatcher sounded calm and told me to stay inside, not to go out, and to wait because units were coming within the next minutes. She asked if I had seen a weapon, and I said no. I had only been in the pain aisle the whole time, alone there. I set the phone down, paid for the Advil and water, and stood by the glass, keeping my eyes on the Camry without blinking much. I didn't open the bottle or take pills, because my hands felt unreliable, and my headache became a background detail compared to what waited outside. The cashier moved beside me, and the older woman came over too, whispering that it was good someone noticed before I left with him inside. The pharmacist went back to work but kept glancing up, and every time I looked away, I forced myself to look again at my car. About 7 minutes later, 2 patrol cars rolled into the lot with lights flashing and no sirens, which somehow felt scarier than noise would have. 4 officers got out, and 2 approached my Camry from opposite sides, holding flashlights that threw hard white circles on glass as they searched quickly. One officer went to the rear passenger door, shined his light through the window, then opened it fast and aimed inside like he expected trouble. His shoulders jerked, he shouted to his partner, and I saw cuffs in his hand as he leaned deep into my back seat right away. They dragged a man out from the floor space between seats, and he had my old gray jacket pulled over his head like a blanket. He wore a dark hoodie, jeans, and white sneakers, and he looked thin and unshaven, around 30, eyes darting everywhere even after they cuffed him. They sat him on the curb, one officer stayed with him, and another walked to the pharmacy door and called me out for a statement. Outside, the air felt cold on my face, and my legs felt like cotton as I said, "That's my car, yes. I came here alone." The sergeant introduced himself as Thompson and asked if I knew the man, and I kept repeating, "No, never seen him, not once, not ever." He said the guy was refusing to talk, they would take him in, and charges would likely be unlawful entry and attempted robbery or worse. Thompson told me to come in the morning for paperwork, and he said my car was checked, nothing missing, nothing damaged, so I drive home. I thanked the pharmacist again, drove home shaking, and that night I barely slept, replaying what would have happened if he had not warned me. So back in college, me and 5 friends had this hobby called urban exploration. We explored abandoned buildings and posted videos on YouTube. The channel was called Forgotten Places, and after 3 years, it had about 15,000 subscribers. We'd hit dozens of spots: old factories, closed malls, ruined churches, abandoned schools, even a small airfield once. Most places were just empty shells, but they made for good videos. The best find was St. Margaret's Psychiatric Hospital on the far edge of town. It was a huge complex with 5 buildings, shut down in 1993 after an abuse scandal the local paper wouldn't stop talking about. We just wanted a location that looked untouched and big enough to explore for multiple weekends. St. Margaret's had a rusty 2-meter fence around it, but there were holes in several spots where people had pulled it apart. We could squeeze through with backpacks and gear without much trouble, so we started going every weekend for a month. Each time we picked a different building or a different section, so we weren't just repeating ourselves on camera. We filmed long hallways with peeling green paint, wards with rusty metal beds, operating rooms with broken equipment, and basements covered in graffiti. It was creepy, but in a normal way, like, this place has been left to rot, and you shouldn't fall through the floor. We liked the history of it, the feeling that you were walking through something the city wanted to forget. We always went during the day, Saturday or Sunday around noon, because you need light and you need to see where you're stepping. Nights were too dangerous. Some floors were soft in spots, stairs were unreliable, and there was broken glass and nails everywhere. We'd also had plaster fall from ceilings in other buildings, and once you hear that crack above you, you stop acting brave real fast. We only had regular headlamps and phone flashlights back then, so night exploring would have meant walking around blind. And if you want to break an ankle in an abandoned hospital, that's exactly how you do it. Still, one time Tyler, who edited all our videos and came up with the concepts, suggested we go at night for atmosphere. He kept bringing up the comments. People constantly asked for night content, and Tyler was convinced it would get more views and push the channel to the next level. Me and Emma and Jason talked about it first, and then the others weighed in. The girls, Emma and Sarah, had doubts, which I get. Tyler wasn't being reckless on purpose, though. He genuinely thought it would be fine if we planned it. So we planned it. We got 4 powerful flashlights, headlamps for everyone, spare batteries, and walkie-talkies in case we split up across different floors or buildings. We agreed on a simple rule: stay together, 2 hours max, no hero stuff. Saturday night we arrived around 10 p.m., when it was fully dark. St. Margaret's looked completely different at night, like a place that didn't want you there. We squeezed through the familiar hole in the fence and headed to the main building we already knew well, a 4-story structure that used to be the administrative center. The plan was simple: go through all 4 floors, film some shadowy flashlight scenes, collect material for a 20 to 30-minute video, and leave. The first floor was empty as usual: lobby with a broken reception desk, hallways with torn wallpaper, offices with overturned furniture. The second floor was familiar too, where the doctor's offices were, small rooms with metal tables and cabinets. We went up to the 3rd floor where the wards for severely ill patients used to be, little rooms with bars on the windows, thick doors with peepholes, and hooks on the walls where straitjackets used to hang. Tyler was filming with a wide-angle lens, Emma was lighting with a powerful flashlight, and the rest of us drifted room to room taking quick phone photos and watching our footing. Everything was calm and going according to plan until we heard a sound, a loud door slam somewhere a floor below, echoing through the empty building. We went silent instantly, looking at each other in the flashlight beams. Tyler killed the camera, and we stood there like idiots, not even whispering. Then we heard footsteps, slow and heavy, coming up the stairs from the floor below. Not a shuffle, not a rat noise, a person in boots. My first thought was security or police, even though in a month of daytime visits we'd never seen either, and Tyler always said, "It's abandoned, no guards." I leaned over the railing and yelled, loud on purpose, "Hey, we're just filming for YouTube, we're leaving now, we don't want trouble." No answer. The steps kept coming, same rhythm, closer. Jason yelled too, "We're leaving right now, don't call the cops." Still nothing. Just those steps. Emma grabbed my arm and said we should take the back exit at the far end of the hall, the one with the other staircase we sometimes used. Everyone nodded. We started moving fast but trying not to stomp. Lights pointed down so we didn't miss holes. I could hear Sarah breathing behind me, and I hate that I remember that. Halfway down the hall, the footsteps sped up. Then it wasn't one set anymore. It sounded like several people running up the stairs, like they'd been waiting and just decided to go. Voices hit us next, echoing, at least 3 men. Rough voices, laughing. One yelled, "Hey kids, where you running? Want to play hide and seek?" That was the moment it stopped being, "Maybe we get a trespassing ticket," and turned into something else. Tyler said, short and sharp, "Exit, now. Stay together." We slammed down the back stairs to the 2nd floor, almost slipping on concrete dust, grabbing a loose railing that felt like it might rip off. Above us, they were running too, stomping and yelling like it was a game. We hit the 1st floor and sprinted for the main doors, and then my stomach dropped again. 3 guys were already in the lobby, flashlights up, blocking the path to the exit. One had a piece of pipe or a metal rod in his hand. He smiled and said, "Stop. Let's talk." None of us stopped. We turned hard into a side hallway toward the emergency exit by the old cafeteria. Their footsteps thundered after us and something flew past. Then glass shattered behind, like they threw a bottle. We shoved through a broken door and the cold night air hit my face. We ran across the overgrown yard, straight for the fence, not looking back. We squeezed through the hole we'd always used and someone tore their jacket on the wire. I heard the rip and a curse. Our cars were parked down the dirt road, 2 of them, and we piled in. Tyler drove me, Emma, and Sarah. Jason had the others. Tyler got the key in, hands shaking, engine turning over, but the headlights wouldn't come on right away. Jason's car was already pulling out. and we sat in darkness while I looked back and saw 3 men stepping out from behind the fence, walking toward us. Tyler finally got the headlights to flare on, hit the gas, and the car lurched onto the asphalt. We raced down the hill and didn't stop until a gas station a few miles away, where Jason was already waiting. Under those bright lights, with normal people coming and going like nothing happened, all I could think was how we acted like that hospital belonged to nobody. Ever. And it didn't. Not at night. And not to kids with cameras. Way back in 2018, I was working night shift as an archivist at a private storage facility for confidential legal documents. The building used to be a bank, so it had steel doors, separate access zones, and long corridors that didn't connect in straight lines. My job was the central desk. If a lawyer needed a file, they'd call ahead. I'd verify the request, pull the folder, and log it out on the card and in the computer. Most nights, nobody needed anything. I read, watched movies, and did quick rounds so I could honestly say I checked the doors. The whole point was chain of custody, because these were lawsuits and investigations, not old newspapers. 2 weeks in, files started not being where they should be. A folder I saw the night before would be gone, then show up later in a different section. Sometimes it would be in an area I wasn't even cleared to enter. The checkout cards were worse. They showed requests I never processed, like someone had borrowed cases without ever coming to the desk. I'd stare at the timestamps, and they'd land right in the middle of my shift. The door logs didn't match my rounds either. I'd look at the electronic access report before going home and see doors opening in departments I hadn't stepped into all night. The entries had exact times, like 2:14 a.m., not some vague overnight count. Nothing tripped an alarm, no forced doors, just clean opens and closes. I assumed the system was buggy, but the same areas kept popping up. The closed cases section freaked me out the most. It held completed investigations marked strictly confidential, and I was told not to enter without a written request from the partners. They only came during the day. The door had a visit counter, and I started noticing it was climbing almost every night. The sign-in sheet said I was alone. So in the morning I told Robert, the day administrator, "Closed cases is getting opened at night, and files are moving." He smiled like I'd just complained about the coffee. He said the system was old, counters scrambled, cards duplicated entries, and locks sometimes logged phantom openings because of voltage issues. "Old building," he said, tapping the desk. "Don't start accusing people. Just do your job." I tried to accept that, but it kept happening. Some mornings the folders were in a slightly different order than I left them. Not a mess, just off. Once I found fresh toner dust around the Xerox machine even though I hadn't used it. So I got methodical. Before leaving each morning, I took quick photos of a few shelves, just enough to show how the folders were lined up. I started doing it because I was tired of second-guessing myself, like I was losing it. When I came back from my shift, I compared the photos to what was actually there. The differences were obvious. Certain folders were shifted a little, pushed back too far, or sitting at the wrong angle. It sounds stupid, but you can tell when someone handled something and tried to fake the reset. Somebody was moving files around, copying something, and returning it close enough to pass a casual glance. I went to Robert again and didn't let him wave it off. I told him I had photos and I wanted an actual check of the system. He looked irritated, but he passed it up to the firm. A technician from the service company came out and ran diagnostics. He didn't joke. He asked me who else had keys, who else had cards, and I told him what the sign-in log said, that it was just me at night. He pulled up the access database and pointed at a list that made my stomach drop. 8 access cards were active, tied to employees who'd quit anywhere from a few months to 2 years earlier. Nobody had deactivated them. The technician said that any of those former employees could still come in at night through the service entrance in the north wing, while I sat in the main hall on the other end of the building. The tech didn't sugarcoat it. He said leaving old cards active was a critical protocol violation, the kind that could get the firm sued if anything ever leaked. He told Robert to notify the managing partner and said they needed a full audit immediately of every door, card, and permission. Later that afternoon, the managing partner called on speakerphone. He sounded careful, like he hated admitting a problem. He promised a review, but said all senior partners had to be present, and it would take weeks. He told me to keep logging everything. No extra guard came after that call. That first night after, I asked Robert where the North Wing service entrance actually was. He pointed down a corridor and said it was past records and behind the old loading area. The directions meant nothing to me. I sat at the desk watching cameras, feeling stupid and alone there. Within an hour, I heard a hinge squeak somewhere far off, then a soft thump like a box set down. I grabbed my flashlight and checked the nearest halls, testing handles with my hand. Nothing. Back at the desk, 10 minutes later, I heard paper rustling from the Xerox room. That pattern repeated for nights. Sounds would start, I would check, and everything was empty. Then I would return and hear it again. Sometimes it was slow footsteps. Sometimes it was the Xerox tray clacking. I never found a door open, which meant no easy proof to show anyone later. After about a week, I pictured the simplest explanation: a former employee who kept an active card. I imagined them waiting near a corner, listening for me to leave the desk. I stopped taking long rounds. Sometimes I'd call out, "This place is monitored," even though it sounded weak anyway. I started sleeping badly during the day. At home, I'd jerk awake to normal sounds and just lie there listening. Friends said I looked sick, like I'd been partying too hard. I stopped explaining because it sounded like a ghost story, and it wasn't. It was bad access control period. 2 months after the tech visit, nothing had changed. The audit kept getting pushed because one partner was in trial, another was traveling, and compliance wanted meetings. Robert would shrug and say, "They're working on it." One morning after a search, I typed resignation and left it on Robert's desk. They called me in and tried to talk me out of quitting. The partner said the logs were wrong, the system was old, and the ex-employees with active cards lived in other states. He said there was no breach. I told him I wasn't accusing anyone, I couldn't stay. After I resigned, they still talked about the audit like it was around the corner. It never happened while I was there. They said it was too complex, thousands of folders, schedules to coordinate, partners needing to sign off, and court sessions kept wrecking meetings. The dates got pushed again. Before I left for good, they tried to reassure me. Robert and the partner said the old system logged phantom openings and scrambled counters. They pointed out the former employees with active cards were in other cities and had new jobs. They said nobody was breaking in at night anyway. I never got an answer, and that is the part that messes with me. Maybe someone was copying confidential files for money or leverage and I just missed them every time. Maybe it was software and a settling building. Either way, I learned how fast rules become excuses at night. So for the context, I live alone in a small house in the Portland suburbs, working as a freelance graphic designer with an absolutely chaotic schedule. Sometimes I work until 3 in the morning on deadlines. Sometimes I wake up at 5 a.m. for calls with European clients. That November night, I delivered a big project around 2 a.m., completely exhausted after 3 days of barely sleeping. I was fried in a way that makes you sloppy about basic stuff, like locks. Before bed, which is not like me usually. Before I went to sleep, I took the trash out to the curb. It's a short walk, but I was on autopilot and thinking about getting under the blanket. I came back inside, closed the door, but forgot to turn the key in the lock. I just pulled it shut and headed down the hallway. I actually thought, I'll come back and lock it, and I even slowed down like I might. Then I got into bed and decided I'd do it in the morning. I fell asleep almost instantly. No excuses, just tired and stupid, and it mattered later. Maybe 30 minutes later, I woke up to a sound that cut straight through the sleep haze. It was the front door hinges, that exact creak my house makes when the door moves. At first, I tried to convince myself it was the wind, even though there wasn't any. Then my brain caught up, and I remembered the unlocked lock. My heart started pounding, and my mouth went dry. I stayed still, listening, hoping I'd misheard. Then I heard it again, softer, like the door settling after being opened. I could not hear voices, but I heard someone step inside. Careful footsteps followed in the hallway. Slow, almost polite, but the old wood floor creaks under any weight, no matter how careful you are. I snapped fully awake and realized someone else was in my house, right now, while I was in bed. My phone was on the nightstand, maybe a foot from my hand, but I couldn't reach for it. I was sure the smallest movement would give me away. My hands were shaking so hard I had to pin them under the blanket to stop them. I tried to remember if I had told anyone I lived alone. The footsteps stopped right outside my bedroom door. I could see the shadow of feet under the door, just standing there in total silence. It felt like a whole minute. Then the doorknob started turning, slow and controlled, like they were testing if it would click. I squeezed my eyes shut and pulled the blanket up to my chin, trying to breathe like I was asleep. The door opened maybe 8 inches. Cold air from the hallway hit my face and I felt watched. I didn't know how long they looked, but I kept my breathing shallow and stayed still. The door closed with the same creak, and the footsteps moved away toward the kitchen. I heard drawers open, then cabinets, and something sliding across the counter. It sounded like searching. A few minutes later, the front door creaked again, and I heard the lock click from the inside. Then nothing. I stayed frozen for another 10 minutes because I didn't trust the silence. Finally, I sat up, locked my bedroom door, and grabbed my phone. When I called 911, I could barely talk, but the dispatcher kept me focused. She told me to stay until officers arrived and searched. Police showed up about 20 minutes later. 2 patrol officers did a sweep, checking every room, closets, basement, attic, and nobody was there. The front door was closed but unlocked from the inside, which matched what I'd heard, and one officer nodded like he believed me. I felt stupid, then angry, because I hadn't been robbed. I'd just been tested. I keep replaying how close that doorknob got to turning all the way. They asked what was missing, and I started checking. Laptop on the desk, tablet on the couch, camera on the shelf, wallet in my purse, everything there. After the officers finished the sweep and said nobody was inside, I took them right to the kitchen. The filleting knife was missing from the set on the magnetic strip. There was an empty space where it always sat. Then I saw my driver's license on the kitchen table, face up. I don't keep it there. It lives in my purse. I brought my purse over and opened my wallet in front of them. Everything else was still there, but the license slot was empty. So someone had opened my purse, taken it out, and carried it into the kitchen. I said, "That's not normal," and one of the officers stopped trying to downplay it. He told me not to touch anything else and called for a detective. The detective arrived about an hour later. He took photos carefully, then dusted for prints on the front door handle, the bedroom doorknob, the kitchen drawers, the table, and the neighboring knife handles on the strip. He had me repeat it. Trash out at around 2, door pulled shut but not locked, asleep fast. Then the hinge creak, slow footsteps, the shadow under my bedroom door, the knob turning, the door opening a little, then closing. After that, kitchen drawers and cabinets, Then the front door lock clicking from the inside, and then silence. He said the behavior didn't match a typical burglar. If someone wanted my valuables, they had time. Instead, they checked my bedroom, took a knife, and left my ID out. He kept coming back to the same question. Why enter a sleeping person's bedroom, steal nothing, and take only a knife? He said that looked like someone confirming I was asleep, maybe planning to return later, or someone familiar with the house who knew where things were. Then he started asking about people in my life. Ex-partners, conflicts with neighbors, fired workers, anyone who'd had access, even a housekeeper. That's when I remembered David. We'd broken up 3 months earlier after jealous outbursts. He accused me of cheating with no reason, demanded access to my phone, and got angry when I worked late. He'd had a key when we were together. When we split, I demanded it back, and he handed me a key, and I accepted it. I told the detective I thought that was the only copy. David still texted me sometimes, asking for a second chance, saying he'd changed. The detective wrote everything down and said he'd check David's alibi, but he also told me to change all the locks immediately. Cameras from neighboring houses showed a figure in a dark hoodie entering my yard around 2:30 in the morning and leaving about 10 minutes later. The face wasn't visible. The height and build could fit David, but it could fit other men too. David had an alibi technically. His roommate said they watched a movie together until 3 a.m., but the detective told me that kind of alibi could be arranged. The fingerprints didn't match anything in the database, and the knife was never found. I changed all the locks the next day and installed an alarm system and cameras, but the feeling of safety was gone. Every creak made me jump, and I couldn't fall asleep without checking all the locks 3 times. 2 months later, I moved to an apartment downtown with a doorman and security, and I still hate that I had to do it. I wake up from any sound and torture myself with the question, who was it that night? What did they want? And will they come back again? Last summer, me and my cousin Marcus were driving back from a music festival in Albuquerque. I'm 28, from a small town in New Mexico, and Marcus is 30. We both took Monday off work so we could drive through the night and avoid the desert heat during the day. We'd left after the last set because neither of us wanted to pay for another night in a hotel. Marcus was the sober one. I was just tired and sunburned and ready for my own bed. I kept checking the time like it mattered, like the road would somehow be safer if we got home before sunrise. Marcus kept saying, "We do this and we sleep all day Monday." And I agreed, even though the drive already felt too long. It was around 2 in the morning on Highway 285, nothing but empty desert and the occasional cactus in our headlights. I was dozing in the passenger seat when Marcus said, "Hey, wake up." The temp gauge was climbing into the red. He pulled over fast but controlled, hazards on, and popped the hood. He shined his phone light down and told me the cooling fan belt had snapped clean. Marcus works as a mechanic, so he had that annoyed, focused look instead of panic. He grabbed his tools from the trunk and said he could rig something with wire to get us to the next town, about 40 kilometers away. I held my phone light while he worked, trying not to hover but also not wanting to be useless. The highway was dead. We hadn't seen another car in over an hour, and my phone kept bouncing between 1 bar and nothing. 5 minutes later, headlights came up behind us and slowed. A dark van pulled onto the shoulder maybe 20 meters back. Not close, not passing, just sitting there. I got nervous immediately, even before anything, because who stops out here at 2 a.m. in a van? A woman stepped out. Middle-aged, light blouse, hair tied back. She didn't look wild or drugged out, just normal. She walked over and asked politely if we needed help, if she could drive us to the nearest town. Marcus thanked her and said we were fine. He had tools. He knew what he was doing. I added, "We're okay," because I didn't want to sound unsure. She nodded, but she didn't go back to the van. She stood off to the side and watched Marcus's hands like she was waiting for him to finish or mess up. I tried to make eye contact, and she looked past me. Not rude, just not really looking at my face. My stomach kept tightening. Marcus leaned toward me and whispered, "This is weird. Say we called someone." So I said it loud enough for her to hear. "It's all good. We already called a tow truck. They said 10 minutes. Total lie. But I thought maybe she'd decide it wasn't worth hanging around." She nodded again, turned, and walked back toward her van. Marcus went right back to work, faster now, shoulders up. I kept my light on the engine, but I was watching the van more than I was watching the belt. The van stayed, headlights still pointed at us, engine idling. A minute later, the woman pulled out a phone and started talking into it. Not texting, not scrolling, actually talking, and she kept glancing at us like she was describing where we were. Then the side door slid open, and 2 more people climbed out. They had black ski masks on. No, "Hey, you need help?" stuff. No hesitation. The woman put her phone away and all 3 of them started walking quickly toward us. In that second, it hit me that the polite offer was just a way to keep us talking, and I still hate how obvious it feels now. Marcus didn't even argue with himself. He just yelled, "Get in the car," and grabbed my wrist hard enough to hurt. We both dove for the driver's side because it was closest. He slid in first, I tumbled in after, and I barely got my door closed before hitting the lock button. They reached the car and started pounding on the windows. One of the masked people yanked on my door handle twice, hard, then looked through the glass like he was checking where my hands were. He stepped back and pulled out a crowbar. The first swing hit my window. The glass cracked in a spider web, but it stayed together. Marcus turned the key and the engine started, but it was overheated and sputtering like it was coughing. He muttered, "Come on," and pumped the gas. The second swing came down on the rear side window and it shattered instantly. Glass flew into the back seat and onto my shoulder. Marcus threw it in drive and we lurched forward maybe 3 meters before the motor choked, shuddered, and died completely. The van's headlights washed over us again when we stopped, like a spotlight. One of them started climbing through the broken rear window right away. Shoulders first, then a leg, fast. Marcus tried the ignition again, but it just clicked, and his face changed in a way I don't really have a better word for than scared. The masked person reached toward the front seats and I could see their hands coming between the headrests. I didn't have a weapon. I had pepper spray in the glove box because of this thing that happened back home, where a guy kept circling me in a mall parking lot and I couldn't shake him. I ripped the glove box open, thumb shaking on the trigger, and twisted in my seat as far as I could without unbuckling. I emptied half the canister straight into their face. I didn't do a warning burst, I just held it down until my eyes watered too. They screamed, or tried to, and fell backward out of the window with both hands over their eyes, hitting the ground hard enough that I heard it. As soon as they dropped back, I slammed my palm down on the horn and kept it there. The blaring filled the car and cut through the desert night, non-stop. I kept thinking, sound carries out here. Marcus stayed still, eyes flicking between the mirrors in the van, like he was waiting for them to try again. The other attackers froze and looked at each other. The woman shouted something sharp, not words I could make out, and all 3 of them backed off at the same time. Then they turned and ran back to the van like they suddenly had somewhere else to be. The side door slammed and the van peeled off. Within seconds, we only saw their taillights disappearing down some dirt road that branched off the highway into the desert, bouncing once, and then vanishing. I kept the horn pressed until my hand cramped, and Marcus finally pried my fingers up for a second to say, okay, listen." Maybe 5 minutes later, Headlights came up behind us, and my stomach dropped again. But it was a highway patrol car. The officer said he'd heard continuous horn blasting from way down the road and came to check it out. He looked at the broken glass and asked, "Where'd they go? And are you two hurt?" After they searched the area, the officer told us that about a kilometer further down the highway, someone had scattered metal tire spikes across both lanes. Our engine breaking down probably saved us from driving right into their trap. They took our statements, put out descriptions of the van, and got us to the nearest town. But as far as I know, they never caught anyone. I've been working on my small ranch in the foothills for the past 15 years, raising alpacas for wool production. Quiet, steady work that brought in about $4,000 a month. I'm Elizabeth, and it wasn't some hobby setup. 23 animals, routine checks, feeding, shearing, vet calls, and paperwork. I knew each one by name and personality, who was pushy at the trough and who needed space. I planned breeding, tracked weights, watched for parasites, and kept receipts like my life depended on it. Because it did. Most days were boring, which I liked, and that matters later. Last summer, one July morning, I walked out to the pen and Bianca was gone. She was a young cream-colored female, still a little skittish, and I expected to find her hiding behind the shelter. But the pen was intact. The high chain-link fence had no breaks, no bent posts, and no digging under it. The gates were still locked with 2 padlocks. I searched the whole property, checked neighboring fields, and asked nearby farmers, but nobody had seen or heard anything. The only thing I found was a small tuft of cream wool stuck on the top rail there. That tuft was too high for her to catch herself on, so my brain went to people, not coyotes. Alpacas are valuable, and taking one quietly would take planning. I hated even saying it, but I decided it was professional thieves hunting animals. I spent $2,000 on a surveillance system, 4 cameras around the perimeter, night vision, and a hard drive that recorded everything. I checked it constantly, half hoping to see something and half terrified I would. The next 2 weeks were quiet. I started thinking whoever did it moved on. Maybe I was wrong. She escaped. Then Oscar disappeared, and that idea died fast. Oscar was my largest male, close to 90 kilograms, and I was getting him ready for a regional show the next month. I went straight to the footage. Around 3 in the morning, the whole herd panicked, running the fence line and making those sharp alarm calls, then bunching into the far corner like they were trying to climb each other. I watched the clip dozens of times. I never saw Oscar leave. I only caught movement in the darkness near the forest edge, just outside the camera's light. That was it. In the morning, I called the police. I felt stupid, but I didn't know what else to do. The officer came out, watched the recordings, and asked basic questions about locks and gates. He wasn't rude, just detached, like it was a chore. I pointed out the fence was untouched, and the gates were still padlocked. He nodded and said it was probably ordinary predators, coyotes, or feral dogs. He said sometimes you don't see blood if they drag something off. I told him there was no carcass, and no way to drag a 90-kilo animal over a tall fence. Over the next 6 weeks, I lost 5 more alpacas, always at night, with no blood and no struggle. The cameras recorded the same pattern. Panic at 3-4 in the morning, the herd bunching together, then later an empty space where one of them should have been. The actual grab happened in blind spots, like whatever it was had learned my setup. I barely slept. I checked the pen every 2 hours and it didn't matter. The thing was patient and careful. The money side turned critical. Each alpaca was $3,000 to $5,000, and that's before wool and breeding. I hired a night guard, a veteran named Ray who'd served in the army and knew how to handle weapons. He patrolled with a rifle and his German Shepherd Rex from 10 p.m. to 6 a.m., circling the pen and the tree line. I tried to sleep with my phone on loud. On the fourth night of his work, I woke up to Rex's desperate barking and 3 shots in a row. I ran out in my robe and saw Ray, pale and shaking, aiming into the darkness of the forest behind the pen, his flashlight darting wildly between trees. Ray lowered the rifle and said, "I saw it. I actually saw it." His voice was trembling. He told me he'd spotted a huge shadow moving between the trees about 30 meters from the fence, too big and too graceful to be a coyote or dog. When he hit it with the flashlight, the beam caught a pair of eyes reflecting yellow-green, about a meter off the ground. For a second he saw the body too, long and muscular, and then it slipped back into the thicket. Rex was straining at the leash, barking so hard he was gagging. Ray kept him tight and said, "I'm not letting him go in there. In the dark, we lose the advantage." The 3 shots were warnings. He fired up and away, hoping the noise would scare it off, but he admitted he wasn't sure it worked. At dawn, we walked the forest edge. The fence was locked and intact, no cut links, and no digging under it. By the stream, the dirt was soft, and we found prints that made me go cold. 4 toed paw marks the size of my palm, no claw marks, clearly feline, and bigger than any bobcat. On the lower barbed wire there were scraps of short, reddish-brown fur. I photographed everything and contacted the regional wildlife control department, sending the photos and the camera clips. 2 days later, a biologist named Thomas arrived. He measured the tracks, studied the fur under a magnifying glass, and said, "Mountain lion. Large adult male." Based on the track size, he estimated around 70 kilograms. He explained drought and fires in the mountains had wrecked normal hunting grounds and pushed cats down toward farms. "They usually avoid people," he said, "but hunger makes them take risks." He told me not to try to track it myself. "Don't go looking for it," he said, "and don't let the dog chase it." He explained a cornered cat can turn on a person fast, and a dog can bring it straight back toward the house. I wrote down his number and saved it under Wildlife Thomas on my phone before he left. He told me to raise the fence to 2 meters, install bright lighting, add sound deterrence, and not go outside alone in the dark. I spent my last $8,000 of savings and took out a loan for another 5. We raised the fencing, put up floodlights, added motion sensors and sirens, and ran extra wire along the bottom and top. Ray kept patrolling, but now Wildlife Control issued him a tranquilizer rifle and told him to call immediately if he saw the cat. They set 3 cage traps in the forest with meat bait, hoping to catch it alive and relocate it. 3 weeks ago, I saw the last signs. Fresh tracks right on the boundary early in the morning, and scratches on an old oak about 1.5 meters up. The territorial markings Thomas had described. Since then, there have been no attacks. The alpacas calmed down, stopped panicking at night, and started eating normally again. The traps are checked every 3 days, but the lion never got caught. Thomas thinks it either went farther into the mountains after the drought eased with autumn rains, or it was shot by poachers in a neighboring county, or it switched to wild prey once it had better options. I want to believe the threat has passed, but every night I still wake up at the slightest rustle, check the cameras on my phone, peer into the darkness outside the window, and listen to sounds from the pen. When I was 20, I started a 3-month internship at a big consulting firm in the city. My first real chance to work in actual business, not just delivering pizzas. I was a junior in college, and I needed it to go well. Skinny, 5'9", no sports background. Heights and tight spaces mess with me. People teased me about it, and I tried to act like it was funny. I know that sounds weak, but that's me. The firm had offices on the 7th, 8th, and 9th floors of a glass building. The first floor was the lobby and reception. On day one, we had a safety briefing, and the building manager pointed at a map and said, "The technical fire stair runs from the underground parking, but it does not open on the first floor. The next door after the basement is on the second. Don't use it unless it's an emergency. Use the elevators." The first 3 weeks went fine. I got used to the pace, made friends with other interns, and we stayed late a lot working on client decks and spreadsheets. Most nights we were still there at 9 or 10, mostly because nobody wanted to look lazy. Then week 3, Wednesday around 2 p.m., someone collapsed in the lobby. A delivery courier passed out right at the reception desk, fell forward, and hit his face on the marble. I didn't see the impact, but people on our floor did, and the screaming carried up. A coworker waved me over to the glass and said, "Dude, look." From the 9th floor you could see down into the inner hall. I saw a crowd forming, and I saw my supervisor down there too. In my head I was thinking, maybe they need help. Realistically, I was just curious. I grabbed my badge and went to the elevators, but they were jammed with people riding down to watch. After a minute of standing there, getting bumped and not moving, I remembered the fire stair door near our department. I told myself I'd walk down to the 2nd floor and catch an elevator from there. I opened the heavy metal door marked Fire Exit and started down the concrete steps. It was louder and emptier than I expected. I kept going, reading the signs as I passed them. 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3. When I reached 2, I slowed, because I figured there'd be a door to the 2nd floor. There wasn't. Just more stairs going down. I stood there with my hand on the rail, staring at that 2 sign like I'd missed something obvious. I should have turned around. But I was already tired from walking down, and I told myself it would be faster to just keep going to the bottom. The underground parking had to have an exit, and from there I could take an elevator up. The lower levels got dimmer. The walls changed from plain concrete to pipes, cable trays, and utility labels I didn't understand. The air got cooler and damp, and my stomach did that sinking thing it does when I know I'm somewhere I shouldn't be. Finally, I hit the lowest landing. A sign read, B2 Technical Floor. There was a heavy metal door, and I pushed it open and stepped into the building's technical basement. It was huge, like a warehouse someone forgot about. Concrete floor, low ceiling, ventilation ducts, shelves of equipment, coils of cable, boxes along the walls. The lights were spaced out and weak, leaving big dark gaps between the shelves. It didn't feel like a place people worked in, more like a place people only came to when something broke. I saw a service freight elevator at the far end, a big metal platform behind a gate, and I headed toward it. Without thinking, I pulled the stairwell door shut behind me, and it slammed hard and echoed. At the elevator, I hit the call button and nothing happened. Next to the buttons was a card reader with a red light. Staff only, obviously. I turned around, went back to the stairwell door, grabbed the handle, and pulled. The door wouldn't open. Panic hit in waves when I yanked the handle again, and it still wouldn't move. I stared at the latch, waiting for a click that never came. Then I remembered my phone was upstairs, charging on my desk, because I'd been trying to look professional. So I was in a locked basement with no phone and no way to tell anyone. Nobody would notice for a while. I kept telling myself to stay calm. I walked the room fast, checking every wall and aisle. There were electrical closets with warning stickers, but the handles were locked. I checked behind shelves, behind stacks of boxes, even under a loose pallet. No exit signs, just storage, cables, and dead ends. It couldn't have been more than 10 minutes, but it felt longer. Then I heard metal creak, like a hinge moving, and I froze. At the far side, A door I hadn't really noticed cracked open, and a man stepped through. Middle-aged, white shirt, tie loosened, tablet in his hand. Relief hit so hard I almost laughed. I walked toward him and said, "I'm an intern upstairs. I got turned around on the fire stairs and the door locked behind me. I don't have my phone. Can you help me get out?" He flinched like I'd scared him. "What are you doing down here?" he said, too loud for the space. I repeated it, faster, and asked if he had a key card to open the stairwell door or call the elevator. He didn't answer that. He glanced back through his doorway and said, "I know another way out. Follow me," and started walking away. I pointed over my shoulder. "Isn't it right here? That door goes to the stairs." He turned fully toward me and I saw his face clearly. He was sweating, beads on his forehead, even though it was cool down there. Behind his glasses, his eyes kept darting. "No," he said, sharper. "Not there. This way is faster." He headed deeper into the basement, away from the stair door and the freight elevator, toward the area that was basically unlit. I didn't follow. He kept looking around as he walked, like he was checking where he was, and that made my stomach twist. If he belonged here, he wouldn't look lost. I started backing toward the stairwell door, slow, hands out. He stopped and snapped, "Hey, where are you going? Come here." The tone was commanding. He pointed toward the far wall. I looked, and it was just stacked boxes in a corner I'd already checked. No doors, no exits. In that moment, it got simple. He wanted me away from every exit and closer to a dead end. He watched me, waiting for me anyway. I didn't know if he was trying to rob me, hurt me, or keep me down there for some other reason, but the reason didn't matter. I'd spent my life being the anxious guy, the one who overthinks and gets told to chill out. And down there I realized that can be useful, because my brain was already listing what I had and what I didn't. I didn't have my phone. I didn't have a weapon. I didn't have leverage except the fact that this was an office building in daytime, with people upstairs who would freak out if they heard someone yelling. Noise was the one thing he couldn't take from me without getting close. If he was harmless, he'd back off, and we'd both be embarrassed. If he wasn't, at least I wouldn't disappear quietly. That's when I decided to scream. When I was 28, my brother-in-law Marcus died in a construction accident. It was May 2012, he was 32, just got promoted to foreman, and his whole future looked bright. The scaffolding collapsed during installation because the contractor cut corners on safety, and Marcus fell 3 stories. James got the call while I was at work, and he just said, "It's Marcus." Like that explained everything. By the time I met him at the hospital, his hands wouldn't stop shaking. A nurse kept asking for our names, and I answered wrong, because my brain was stuck on the word fall. Marcus was funny and kind, the guy who'd show up with tools and snacks and act like he was doing you a favor by helping. He taught me how to shut off the water main the first week I moved in with James. At the funeral, the casket stayed closed because of the injuries, and that detail still makes me angry. People lined up to hug us and say they were sorry, but it felt like all of it was happening to a stranger. James stared at the floor and didn't talk. I waited for a joke that never came. A month later, we moved into a new townhouse in the suburbs we'd already been shopping for. We'd signed papers before the accident, so backing out meant losing money, and James insisted we needed something new. Marcus had actually helped us pick the neighborhood. He'd driven around with James pointing at roofs, sidewalks, drainage, all the stuff I never noticed. He told us what renovations to do first and what could wait. Moving in felt like stepping into a plan Marcus wrote and left unfinished. Every time I opened a box, I found his suggestions in James's notes and texts. James had struggled with depression and anger for years, but he hid it well while we dated and were engaged. I saw little flashes, like him slamming a door or going quiet in an argument, but he'd come back and apologize. After the wedding, it got more regular. He'd snap at me for asking a question, then act like I provoked him. I started measuring my words. I told myself it was stress and grief and that he'd find his footing again. Marcus was one to calm him down, and without him there was no buffer between James and me. The months after that were a slow slide. James started taking painkillers left over from an old sports injury, then washing them down with beer. He'd say, "It's just to sleep," but he'd be awake, pacing, picking fights. I tried suggesting therapy, grief groups, anything. He said I didn't get it, and that I was judging him. By the time spring came around, I planned my day around his moods, and I hated that I did it. Sometimes he'd slam a cabinet so hard it cracked, then stare at it like it was my fault for standing there at all. By the first anniversary of Marcus's death, the atmosphere in our house was unbearable. James took a week off work saying he wanted to stay home and remember his brother, but instead he drank from morning until night every day. On the anniversary, he decided we needed a memorial barbecue, ribs with Marcus's special marinade the brothers made every summer. I agreed, hoping it would give him comfort or closure. We invited our neighbors Jeff and Carol because they knew what happened and seemed supportive. I wanted witnesses around, which sounds awful, but I didn't trust who James became alone. The first couple hours went okay. James grilled, drank beer, and told stories about Marcus. Jeff laughed, Carol smiled, and I played along because I wanted normal for once. After dinner we came back inside, and James opened a bottle of whiskey. He drank fast, half the bottle in under an hour, and I saw that shift in his eyes. Thinking back, that's when the memorial ended, and the fight started right there. Then he started picking at me, first saying I didn't help enough with the barbecue, then saying I was smiling at the neighbors like nothing had happened. The fight exploded instantly. James went from telling a story about Marcus to shouting at me like I'd betrayed him. He said I didn't respect his brother's memory, that this was just another day to me, and that I never really loved Marcus at all. He kept repeating, "You don't care, you don't care," like saying it enough times would make it true. I stood there trying to keep my voice steady, because the neighbors were still in the room and I felt exposed already. I tried to explain that I was grieving too, that I thought about Marcus every day, but it just made him hotter. He talked over me, accusing me of faking it, of smiling like nothing happened. Then he grabbed the framed photo of Marcus from the living room shelf and whipped it into the wall. The glass burst everywhere. Right after that, he raked his arm across the shelves, knocking down books, vases, and souvenirs we'd collected, until ceramic pieces were bouncing across the floor. I froze in the doorway. When he reached the kitchen, he yanked open cabinets and threw dishes onto the floor until they broke. Plates and mugs went first, then bowls. He moved fast, breathing hard, not looking at me. Then he pulled out my handmade ceramic set, the one my grandmother gave me as a wedding gift, and smashed that too. The thing took maybe 2 minutes before he turned and went down to the basement workshop, slamming the door so hard the walls shook. I collapsed on the floor in the middle of all the broken glass and started crying. I'd always thought of myself as someone who could handle hard stuff, but in that moment, I couldn't even stand up without shaking. Roxy kept circling and whining, and that pulled me back into my body. I started picking up the sharpest pieces because I was terrified she'd cut her paws. I wasn't cleaning to be neat. I was just trying to remove the things that could hurt her. A few minutes later, James came back up from the basement carrying a crowbar he used for renovation projects. He stepped through the debris like it was nothing and walked right past me. He went straight into the bedroom, and for a second I thought he was putting it away and going to sleep. Then I heard crashing and breaking. He was destroying furniture, slamming the crowbar into the mirror, then the nightstands, like he needed every object to pay for what he felt inside. Carol heard the noise and knocked. When she saw the mess and me on the floor, she came in. James came out of the bedroom with the crowbar and screamed at her to get out, that it wasn't her business. Carol stayed calm and told him she just didn't want anyone hurt. She offered to let me stay at their place overnight, said since James made the mess he could clean it. I refused because I wouldn't leave my house and Roxy at his mercy. Carol left after that, and I sat there anyway, frozen, because moving felt risky, like it might set him off again. James paced, yelled, then broke down, sobbing Marcus's name into his hands. It went in loops, rage, then tears, then rage again. I didn't argue, and I didn't try to comfort him, because both had gotten me hurt before. I held my shaking dog and watched the clock until the sky started to lighten, praying to make it to sunrise, and I didn't sleep for over 48 hours straight. I've been working as senior manager at a 24-hour fitness club in Arizona for about 3 years now. That morning I came in at 6 for my usual shift, and Kevin, our trainer coordinator, walked up to me with the darkest expression I'd ever seen on his face. Kevin is usually the guy asking me if we can approve overtime, so when he looked like he'd just gotten bad news, I stopped what I was doing. He said, "Do you know who was working the front desk the night before?" I told him I wasn't sure, but I could check the schedule and pull up camera footage. I asked what this was about. He took a breath and said 4 of his trainers got attacked in the parking lot around 5 in the morning. Not a shove, not a yelling match. He said they were hunted out there. Kevin said a client they'd refused service to the night before waited near the side of the building. The guy had dumbbells in a gym bag and started throwing 20-kilo weights at their cars. 2 windshields shattered. One trainer told Kevin he heard the glass pop like a gunshot. They ran to the doors, banging and yelling for help, but nobody answered. Kevin kept repeating that part, like it was the worst piece to swallow. I told him I'd figure out what happened immediately and write a full incident report. I also told him I'd get the footage saved before it rolled over, because our system only keeps so much. I didn't have the luxury of freaking out in front of him. I had to do manager stuff, even though my hands were already tight into fists. I checked the overnight schedule and saw it was Jason at the desk. Jason was the one employee who always tested limits. Late arrivals, long breaks, ignoring door protocols, the whole deal. I'd written him up before, and he always acted like the rules were personal. I pulled up the security footage and rewound to about an hour before the attack. The entry camera showed Jason sitting behind the registration desk, scrolling on his phone. At 4:45, he stood up, looked around, and walked outside to smoke, leaving the desk completely empty. Night shift staff can't do that. If someone needs help, that desk is the only line between them and whatever is happening. I switched to the parking lot camera, because I already knew the rest would be worse. 4 trainers came out together after finishing the closing cleanup. A big guy in a tracksuit stepped from around the corner and started yelling like he owned the place. One trainer tried to explain, waving his hands in that calm-down way people do when they're trying not to set someone off. The attacker reached into his bag, pulled out a dumbbell, and launched it straight at the nearest car. It went through the windshield and the glass exploded across the seats. The trainers ran to our front doors, pounding and screaming, but Jason wasn't there. He was on the other side of the building with headphones on, smoking, and you could tell he couldn't hear a thing. The attacker grabbed another weight and smashed a second windshield. One of the guys shouted something to the others, like, "Forget it, just run," because they all sprinted to their cars. They peeled out fast while the psycho kept screaming and waving the dumbbell at them. A few minutes later, Jason wandered back from his smoke break, totally clueless. I sat there staring at the screen, realizing a door means nothing if nobody is listening inside. Watching that made me feel sick and furious at the same time. If they'd tripped, if the guy had hit someone instead of the glass, we'd be talking about a death, and my employee would still be outside vaping. I called my director immediately and told him everything I saw on the footage. He got quiet for a second. Then he said he was furious that Jason was on duty. He said Jason already had multiple written warnings for being late, leaving early, sleeping on shift, and this was the final straw. That evening the trainers came in for their shift, and I pulled them into the little office behind the front desk. I shut the door behind us. I didn't want members hearing this, and I didn't want them reliving it while someone was asking for a locker lock. Kevin sat with us, arms folded, jaw tight, like he was daring himself not to explode. Ethan did most of the talking. He's 22, a college student, and he's usually the calm one who jokes with the regulars. He said the attacker came in the night before, clearly drunk or high, demanding personal training right now. All 4 trainers were already booked, and 2 were mid-session, so they told him they'd schedule him for another time. He didn't like that. Ethan said the guy started cussing loud, pointing at each of them, saying they were disrespecting him on purpose. Then he threw out discrimination and kept repeating it, like it was a weapon. Ethan told him, "No, we're just full." And the guy stepped closer and said, "You think you're better than me?" Ethan said he kept his voice even and asked him to leave until he calmed down. The guy finally walked out, but he turned around twice, staring at their faces. One of the other trainers said it felt like he was taking a picture with his eyes. They didn't think he'd come back with weights, but they all remembered that look. While Ethan talked, the other trainers filled in details I didn't catch from the footage, like how one of them stood between the guy and the desk to keep him from stepping behind the counter. None of them acted like heroes. They just acted like employees trying to keep the place from going off the rails at 1 in the morning. Kevin told me he was filing an official complaint with corporate about negligence and night shift safety. He wasn't trying to get anyone sued for fun. He just wanted it on record that the desk was empty when they needed help. I told him to do it, and I said I'd attach my incident report and the footage notes. I called my director after that, and he didn't argue. He said he didn't blame Kevin at all, and he agreed we failed them. He told me to document Jason leaving his post, the timestamps, the previous write-ups, everything. He also told me to stop treating overnight as lighter, just because it's quiet most nights. Jason got fired 2 days later. It wasn't dramatic, but it was ugly in a quiet way. He kept saying it was only a smoke break, and he didn't hear anything with his headphones. The director told him that's the point. You can't be outside and not hear, and you can't leave the desk empty. Jason handed over his key fob and left. Corporate did a full safety protocol review across the chain. It wasn't just my location. They looked at every 24-hour club. After that, we got an emergency alert system installed and real panic buttons out in the parking lot. They also hired night security guards, and we changed our rules so nobody is alone on the desk without security on site. About a week later, I ran into Ethan on the floor and asked how he was doing. He hesitated, then admitted he still gets nervous when his shift ends. He said loud sounds in the lot make him flinch, and he automatically scans cars before he unlocks his. Then he shrugged and said he needs the money for tuition and can't quit over one crazy guy. That part stuck with me ever since, because he was right, and it was still wrong. We fixed policies, fired Jason, put in buttons and guards, but none of that changes what happened at 5 in the morning. The police never found the attacker, he never came back, and the cameras didn't catch his license plate number. Last fall, when my second cousin Gerald died of a heart attack at 78, I barely remembered him. We'd met maybe 3 or 4 times at family holidays when I was in high school and college, and it was always just a handshake, a nod, and then he went back to sitting quiet on the couch like I wasn't there. So the call from a lawyer caught me off guard. He said Gerald left me his Victorian house in his will. I told him, no joke, he must have the wrong Daniel. I didn't even know Gerald owned property. The lawyer explained Gerald had no kids. His wife had died about 10 years earlier, and there weren't many close relatives left to sort things out. Somehow I was the only one who'd checked in at all in the last few years, even if it was just passing greetings from my mom, his niece. He sounded almost relieved, like he could close the file and be done with it that day. The house was about 40 minutes outside the city, an old 2-story place built in the 19th century with tall ceilings and too many doors. Gerald bought it after he retired, lived there alone, and, from what I could tell, didn't talk to neighbors much. When I first walked through with the lawyer, it felt more neglected than anything else. Still, I was 32, working remote as a graphic designer, paying $1,200 a month for a tiny apartment, and this was my chance to finally stop renting. My friends called it a creepy mansion, but I saw square footage and a mortgage payment of $0, and I said yes. The first weeks were honestly great. After city noise, the quiet felt like something I could finally use. I spread out my work setup, took calls without a neighbor's music bleeding through, and started thinking about normal future stuff. I even got a dog, which I'd wanted for years. I adopted Max from a shelter, a 3-year-old golden retriever with a friendly, steady temperament who followed me everywhere. He'd drop a toy at my feet during meetings, then sigh like he was the one paying for this house all along. About a month in, odd little things started happening, the kind you can explain away if you want to. In the morning, the coffee maker would be on the kitchen shelf, even though I was sure I'd left it on the counter. Books in my office would be in a different order than I arranged them after unpacking. The front door was unlocked a few mornings too, even though I remembered the click of the lock and checking the handle before bed. I blamed fatigue and being scattered. I was working 12-hour days on a big project, sometimes until 2 or 3 in the morning, sleeping 5 hours, forgetting meals, losing my phone, and mixing up what day it was. Then sounds joined the list. I'd be downstairs working and hear light creaks on the second floor like someone shifting weight. Around midnight there would be slow footsteps in the hallway, not fast, not frantic. I'd go up with a flashlight and check every room, methodically, because I didn't want to be the guy who ignores a real problem. I never found anyone. Just empty rooms and old boards that reacted to temperature and humidity changes that I barely understood. Max got worse instead of better. He'd bark at empty corners of the living room, growl at the dining room, and then look at me like I was missing the point. He also refused the stairs completely, whining and bracing with all 4 paws when I tried to coax him up. I took him to the vet, thinking hearing or vision, maybe some weird nerve thing. They checked him over and said he was fine. No injury, no explanation, nothing. One evening near the end of month 2, I came back from groceries around 8 and stopped in the kitchen doorway. Cabinets were wide open, plates and glasses smashed, dishes everywhere. I checked the windows, all shut. The door had both locks set, and I opened it with my key. The next morning I went to an electronics store and bought 3 indoor cameras with motion sensors. It was about $300, which hurt, but I needed proof that wasn't my tired brain. I installed one in the living room facing the front door, one in the kitchen aimed at the cabinets, and one upstairs looking down the hall. The app let me watch live and saved clips to the cloud. I tested each camera by walking past, waving, and tossing Max a toy so he'd move too. Then I set alerts to buzz my phone if anything moved. The first 3 nights were boring. The only motion clips were me grabbing water, Max switching spots on his rug, and the hallway light popping on when I used the bathroom. By the 3rd morning I was almost relieved, like I could blame the mess on old pipes or my own clumsiness. On the 4th night my phone buzzed at 2:17 a.m., kitchen motion. I opened the clip and heard cabinet doors thumping, hinges creaking, then glass breaking. The video showed an empty kitchen under a nightlight, cabinet still closed. No shadows, no blur, just the sound, like a prank. I stared at that clip until my eyes burned, then grabbed a baseball bat and my flashlight. Max followed but stayed behind my legs, whining under his breath. In the kitchen, every cabinet was open, and 3 plates and 2 cups were shattered on the floor, exactly like before. Nothing else was disturbed. I watched the recording again upstairs, rewinding it over and over, waiting for a door to swing or a hand to appear. It never did. That was the first time I wondered if I was doing this myself and forgetting. I Googled schizophrenia symptoms at 3 a.m. 2 weeks later, I tried to focus on practical stuff. The basement was damp, smelled like mold, and the pipes looked ancient, so I called a contractor, Frank. He was a guy with a no-nonsense voice who'd been doing this a long time. I walked him through what I wanted done before winter. He went down the wooden steps with his flashlight, and I stayed at the top with Max. I heard Frank's boots moving, then some muttering. After 5 minutes, he came up pale and said, "Leave now. Don't turn on anything or light anything. Call the gas company." Frank pointed at the furnace and showed me a crack in the heat exchanger. "Carbon monoxide," he said. He explained it can cause confusion, memory loss, and doing things without realizing. I called 911. The gas service arrived with detectors and read 70 parts per million on the first floor, 120 upstairs, and over 300 in the basement. One guy said safe is under 9, and anything over 50 is dangerous. They shut off the gas, ran fans, and ordered me out. At the hospital, my carboxyhemoglobin was 23%, and the doctor warned me I could have died in sleep. I kept thinking about how I'd been so sure there was an intruder, or that the house was messing with me, when it was basically my brain getting poisoned. The scariest part is how normal I felt most days, like I could still work and joke on calls, while at night I was apparently wandering and dropping dishes. Max wasn't acting weird. He was reacting to something I couldn't sense. I also hate that I almost convinced myself I was losing my mind instead of checking the obvious dangers first. If you're in an older place, take carbon monoxide seriously. Back in October 2016, about a week after my 24th birthday, I was renting this small second-floor apartment in an old brick building downtown. I'm a programmer, was working for a local IT company, and I didn't buy into theories about neighbors spying through windows or listening through walls. That always sounded like paranoid nonsense. The building was from the 50s, 8 units total, with floors that creaked and windows that rattled in the wind. It was cheap and close to work. I'm also routine-driven. Same hook for my keys, same spot for my wallet, and I notice when stuff isn't where it should be. So when weird things started happening, I assumed it was me. At first, it was small. I'd go to leave and my car keys wouldn't be on the hook by the door. They'd be on the kitchen table instead. Or the bathroom door would be slightly open even though I remembered closing it. We were on a new project and I was tired, so I blamed stress. Then one morning I found the front door locked only on the main lock but not the latch. I was sure I'd done both the night before. The only explanation I immediately landed on was that I'd ordered pizza, and maybe I was rushing when I went downstairs to meet the delivery guy, and I didn't re-latch it properly. After that, I started noticing food disappearing faster than it should. A jar of peanut butter was empty after 3 days instead of the usual week. Half a loaf of bread vanished, even though I could swear I'd only eaten 2 toasts from it. I told myself I was snacking while working and not registering it. Sleep deprivation makes you do dumb stuff. I even joked with a coworker. I said, "I think I'm getting forgetful at 24." And he laughed and told me to get more sleep. I wanted that to be the answer. Then I got home from work and found my toothbrush wasn't in the cup on the shelf above the sink. It was lying sideways on the edge of the sink, and it was damp, like somebody had just used it. I'd brushed my teeth that morning, over 10 hours earlier, and I hadn't been home since. I just stood there staring at it, trying to force a normal explanation. That was when the "maybe I'm just tired" story fell apart. Someone had been in my apartment. Someone had used my things. I checked the windows, all locked. I checked the front door. The lock looked intact. No scratches, no bent frame, nothing obvious. That didn't help. It meant whoever it was didn't need to break in. The next day, I made myself act logical. Before leaving, I arranged things in ways I wouldn't accidentally change. I set a book on the table at a precise angle. I pushed a chair away from the table to a specific distance. I took photos on my phone so I couldn't argue with myself later. In the kitchen, I left a new package of cookies and drew a line on the packaging with a permanent marker to show the level. When I came back that evening, I checked everything against the photos. The book had been turned differently. The chair was pushed closer to the table, and 3 cookies were missing. I hadn't touched them, and the marker line confirmed it. My heart was pounding because there was no excuse left. Someone really was getting into my apartment while I was gone, like it was normal. I immediately ordered a hidden security camera from Amazon, but the delivery kept getting delayed. First they promised 3 days, then a week, then 2 weeks because of supplier problems. I kept refreshing the tracking page like that would help. Every night I'd walk in and look at the table first, like it was a test I didn't want. I didn't tell friends because it sounded insane, and I didn't want to accuse anyone without proof. So I went to work, came back, and checked the room like an audit, and all this time I lived knowing someone was entering my apartment. When the camera finally arrived, I put it on a shelf in the living room aimed at the front door and the edge of the kitchen. I turned on motion recording, checked that it worked, and left for work the next morning with this feeling in my chest. That evening I pulled up the footage on my laptop. About 90 minutes after I left, the door opened with a key. An older woman walked in wearing a robe and slippers. I recognized her immediately. Mrs. Olson from the 3rd floor, the quiet neighbor I'd exchanged hellos with for months. She didn't act like she was sneaking around. She went to my fridge, poured orange juice into one of my glasses, drank it, then opened the cookie pack and took 3. She sat on my couch and flipped through a magazine from my table for a few minutes, put it back slightly off, then walked toward the bathroom area that was out of frame. A minute later, she came back out, left, and locked the door behind her with the same key. I called the landlord right away. "Someone has a key to my apartment," I told him. He tried the usual stuff about me forgetting things, so I said, "It's Mrs. Olson. I have video." That got him to take it seriously. He told me to come by in the morning. In his office, I showed him the clip. He looked shocked and started digging through his documents. He explained that Mrs. Olson had lived in the building for over 20 years, and before me, my unit was rented by her close friend, an elderly man who moved to a nursing home a year earlier. That man had given her a spare key. She was supposed to return it when he moved out, but she never did. The landlord admitted he hadn't checked and hadn't changed the locks when I moved in, even though I'd asked him to change them when I moved in. And he'd said it wasn't necessary at all. Mrs. Olson's adult kids contacted me that same day. They were embarrassed and worried, and honestly, I didn't blame them for panicking. They told me she had early-stage dementia after her husband died 2 years earlier. They said she confused my apartment with her friend's old place and would let herself in when she felt lonely, like she was visiting. They admitted they'd been hiding how bad it was because they were afraid she'd get kicked out. I still filed a police report and gave them the video. The prosecutor later refused to press criminal charges because medical evaluation showed she wasn't mentally competent, there was no intent to harm, and nothing was taken besides food. Her family agreed to a settlement. They paid for a full lock replacement, upgraded to coded locks, and gave me a written statement that she was moving to her daughter's place out of state for treatment. The landlord only helped after I threatened a lawsuit for negligence and violating the lease terms. I also added a simple chain on the inside. After that, the intrusions stopped completely. Even years later, even after moving, I check my locks 3 times before bed and before leaving. If I travel, I take quick photos of the room without thinking about it, like I'm making my own receipts. I keep a camera running in my living room now, not because I think Mrs. Olson is coming back, but because I can't forget how long someone was walking into my home while I was at work.